Have you ever wondered what happens when silence becomes your greatest weapon? In a galaxy where strength is measured by victory and dominance, one man breaks every rule. K7. A mysterious figure, an enigma, feared by even the most powerful warriors. Watch as he shatters the unbreakable, proving that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in power, but in restraint. Join us as we uncover the untold story of K7, his battles, his triumphs, and the deep truth he reveals about the nature of strength. This is a fight that will change everything, and it's one you won't want to miss. Stay tuned. The arena was alive with the roars of thousands of spectators. Holographic lights flickered in the darkened sky above, bathing the massive Colosseum in a shimmering glow. The crowd was restless, hungry for the violence that was about to unfold. It was a spectacle, a show for the galaxy, a contest between the most powerful beings across hundreds of star systems. Yet today, this battle would be different. Today, the human slave was about to face a warrior who had never been beaten. Ares stood tall at the center of the Colosseum, her silver armor gleaming like a polished blade under the harsh lights. Her reputation preceded her. The undefeated champion of 9 star systems, a bloodline so pure her name echoed through the galaxies. She was royalty in the harshest sense, an embodiment of power and control. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the crowd as they chanted her name in unison. She was untouchable, and she knew it. This wasn't a fight, it was a public execution. Her opponent, a nameless, faceless slave brought in from the Varnak pits, a mere speck in the vastness of the universe, unworthy of even a title. The announcers' voices boomed across the arena, their words lost in the sea of cheers. Ares raised her arm, and the crowd went wild, their deafening roars reverberating off the walls of the Colosseum. She basked in their adoration, their belief that she was invincible. She was prepared to make this battle as humiliating as possible for her opponent, to prove to the universe once again that no one could challenge her. From the opposite gate he emerged. His figure was nothing like hers. Bare-chested, with chains dragging behind him like the weight of his past, he stepped into the arena with a quiet, unsettling composure. His skin was scarred, his body marked by years of suffering, but there was no fear in his eyes. He didn't look up as the crowd jeered and laughed at him. He didn't flinch when they called him a slave. He didn't move when they spat their insults. His silence was louder than their taunts. Ares smirked. "This is who they send me," she muttered to herself, her voice filled with disdain. She couldn't even be bothered to look at him, so sure of her victory. The fight had not yet officially begun, but she was already planning how to end it quickly, with a flourish, to cement her place as the greatest warrior in the galaxy. The bell rang, and with it, the arena came alive with anticipation. Ares wasted no time. She flicked her wrist, summoning her plasma whip with a flourish, and lashed it toward him. The whip crackled through the air, a deadly arc of light. She aimed for his chest, but he sidestepped it effortlessly, not even breaking a sweat. The crowd gasped in surprise. He wasn't moving quickly, just with precision, avoiding the strike like a man who had been in countless battles. Ares' eyes narrowed. "You think you can dodge me?" she sneered, her pride wounded by the ease with which he avoided her attack. She cracked the whip again, faster this time, aiming for his side. But once again he moved, fluid and precise, stepping inside the arc of her whip as if he knew it would come before she did. He was reading her. He was anticipating her every move. The realization hit Ares like a punch to the gut. Her heart raced, but she refused to show it. "No one dodges me like this," she muttered under her breath. She charged at him, fury blinding her to everything but the need to break him. But the moment she closed the distance, he was on her. His shoulder collided with hers like a hammer striking steel, sending her flying backward with a force that stole the breath from her lungs. She landed hard on the ground, the air knocked out of her chest. The crowd's laughter faltered, replaced by confusion. She scrambled to her feet, her pride bleeding faster than the cuts on her skin. Her arm ached from the impact, but she ignored it, rising with rage. "Do you think I'll let you win?" she growled, her voice low and dangerous as she pulled herself together. She spun her plasma whip again, but this time her attack was fueled by more than skill. It was fueled by desperation. She needed to win. She couldn't afford to lose to him. She struck with all her might, but once again he sidestepped her with ease, slipping past her defenses like a ghost. Before she knew it, his hand was on her arm, twisting it with an inhuman speed, and there was a sickening crack. The sound echoed through the arena. She screamed, clutching her dislocated arm, but he didn't seem to care. He didn't even look at her as he slapped her once, the open-handed strike ringing through the Colosseum like a death knell. She stumbled backward, disoriented, her vision swimming. The crowd was silent now, unsure of how to react. Ares, the great warrior, the undefeated champion, had been humiliated by a nameless slave. He didn't boast. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at her as he turned and walked away, his back to her, his head held high in silent defiance. There was no official call. The fight wasn't over, but it was clear who had won. The silence in the arena was deafening, broken only by the sound of his chains dragging behind him as he walked to the gate. He let them reattach the chains without resistance, without a word. Ares stood frozen, staring at him, her mind reeling with confusion. She couldn't comprehend what had just happened. He hadn't fought like any opponent she had ever faced. He hadn't fought with anger or bravado. He had fought with something far more dangerous: control. And that, more than anything else, made him the greatest threat she had ever encountered. Later that night, as the footage of the fight spread across the galaxy, everyone would ask the same question. Who is K7? The clip of her spitting on him and him simply staring back in silence became the most talked about moment in the entire arena's history. Experts analyzed the fight frame by frame, trying to understand the impossible, the way he moved with such precision, such grace, and yet without effort. He hadn't even flinched. He hadn't said a word, and that was what terrified everyone. Silence, in a world built on noise, was the greatest weapon of all. Ares watched the footage over and over again, her mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. She had thought she was untouchable, but in one moment, everything had changed. He didn't even look angry, she whispered to herself. He looked disappointed. And that, she realized, was the true victory. The news of K7's victory spread like wildfire across the galaxy. His name, though just a designation, echoed in every corner of the known universe. No longer just a nameless slave, he had become an enigma, an unsolvable puzzle that even the most experienced warriors couldn't comprehend. The galaxy buzzed with questions. Who was he? What was he? But the more they talked, the more they understood that there were no simple answers. Ares sat alone in her private chambers, her arm wrapped in bandages, the pain from the dislocated shoulder still gnawing at her. The healers had done their best, but it wasn't the physical pain that bothered her. It was the crushing realization that she, the undefeated champion, had been defeated not by power, but by something far more unsettling: silence. K7 hadn't raised his voice, hadn't taunted her, hadn't even looked at her like a worthy opponent. It was as if he had known the outcome before the fight had even begun. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind. The moment she spat on him, expecting him to react, expecting him to show anger or fear or any emotion at all. But instead, he just stood there, staring at her, silent. That single moment haunted her. She had expected a show, a battle filled with words, insults, and threats. But what she got instead was a cold, calculated silence that sent a shiver down her spine. The next morning, the arena's schedule was posted, and to Ares' surprise, K7's name was listed again. Another fight? She thought. Who would be foolish enough to face him now? But the challenge wasn't for her. It was for someone else, a warrior from the Outer Rim Syndicates, a cybernetically enhanced enforcer named Gloric. Gloric was a giant, towering at over 7 feet tall, with chrome-plated arms that could crush bones with a single blow. He was known throughout the galaxy as a walking execution order, a fighter whose kill count was in the double digits. He was the type of opponent Ares had faced before, someone who relied on sheer force and brutality. She couldn't help but watch. The match was set, and the anticipation in the arena was palpable. The crowd filled the stands, eager to see if K7's victory had been a fluke, or if he truly was as invincible as it seemed. Ares, still healing, was among the onlookers, her arm aching with each movement, but her mind fixed on K7. Could he do it again? She wondered. The gates opened, and Gloric walked into the arena with the same arrogant swagger that Ares had once held. His massive frame loomed over the crowd, and the roar of the audience echoed his pride. He flexed his cybernetic fists, the metal gleaming under the lights. The crowd cheered, their voices shaking the very foundations of the arena. Gloric raised his arms, taunting K7, daring him to make the first move. K7 entered from the opposite gate, just as he had before. Barefoot. Silent. His eyes fixed on the ground, his body relaxed, but there was something unsettling in the way he moved. He wasn't rushing to the center, wasn't trying to impress the audience. He just walked, as if the outcome of the battle had already been decided. His chains rattled faintly as he moved, but it was the lack of fear in his eyes that unsettled the spectators. He wasn't afraid of Gloric. He wasn't afraid of anything. Gloric roared, charging at K7 with a primal fury. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the clash. The ground shook as Gloric closed the distance, his massive fists raised, ready to deliver a crushing blow. But K7 didn't flinch. He didn't even move. He waited. At the last moment, as Gloric's fist swung toward him, K7 ducked, his movements almost too fast to follow. It wasn't panic. It was precision. It was as if K7 had already seen the future, already knew exactly where the punch would land. He slipped under Gloric's attack like a shadow, and in the same fluid motion, K7's elbow slammed into Gloric's kidney with brutal accuracy. The force of the blow sent a ripple through the arena, and Gloric staggered backward, winded, his body momentarily losing control. The crowd gasped. They hadn't expected this. Gloric, the unstoppable force, had been momentarily stopped. The giant shook his head, trying to regain his balance, but before he could make his next move, K7 was already behind him. There was no hesitation, no showmanship. K7's movements were a flawless symphony of efficiency, each one designed to disarm, to disable, to dominate without any wasted effort. Gloric spun around, his cybernetic arms swinging wildly, but K7 was already inside his reach. He moved with the same cold precision, sidestepping Gloric's attack, and in one smooth motion, he pressed 2 fingers into the nerve port at the base of Gloric's neck. The cybernetic warrior froze, his entire body locking up as the control systems in his body short-circuited. With a single calculated motion, Gloric collapsed to the ground, his massive frame crumpling like a puppet with its strings cut. The arena fell silent. Not a single cheer, not a single shout. Just the sound of Gloric's body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. K7 didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He had already won. Without a word, he turned and walked back toward the gate. The guards didn't stop him. They didn't even look at him. They simply stepped aside, allowing him to pass. It was as if they had accepted it, as if they had known from the start that K7 was something else entirely. Ares watched in stunned silence. She had never seen anything like this. The fight was over in a matter of seconds. But it felt like a lifetime. K7 hadn't fought with power. He hadn't fought with rage. He had fought with understanding. He had known exactly how to take Gloric down, exactly how to use his opponent's strength against him. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever witnessed. The footage of the fight spread quickly across the galaxy. Analysts, military tacticians, and combat experts all weighed in, trying to break down K7's movements, trying to understand how he had defeated a cyborg warrior with such ease. No one could explain it. Some said it was muscle memory, others said it was predictive reflexes. But one thing was certain, K7 wasn't just a fighter, he was something else, something beyond human. Ares sat alone in her quarters again that night, her mind racing. She had to know more. She had to understand what made him tick. This wasn't just a fight, it was a challenge, a message. K7 hadn't fought for victory. He had fought to prove that he didn't need to. But even as she searched for answers, a part of her understood the truth. K7 wasn't like anyone she had ever fought. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to show off. He just was. And that, more than anything, terrified her. As the footage of the match continued to spread across the galaxy, people started to ask one question over and over. Who was K7? The answer, it seemed, was simple. He was the one who didn't need to fight to win. He was the one who had already beaten everyone before the battle had even begun. The galaxy had been set ablaze with rumors and whispers. Every system, from the outer rim to the heart of the Vraxan Empire, buzzed with the same question. Who was K7? In the weeks following his victory over Gloric, the enigmatic fighter had become a legend. His name, once just a designation, was now synonymous with power and mystery. He had fought, defeated, and walked away, all without a single word, without any display of emotion. But as the universe watched in awe, there were those who began to fear what K7 represented. He wasn't just a fighter, he wasn't even just a man. He was an idea, an unsettling force that defied every rule, every expectation. His silence, his restraint, was a message that no one could fully comprehend. On the other side of the galaxy, in the grand halls of the Vraxen Council, Ares sat in a private chamber, her eyes fixed on the holographic feed of K7's latest fight. His every movement, every breath, was dissected by military strategists and analysts, but no one could explain how he did it, how he took down a cybernetic enforcer twice his size, and did so in less than 30 seconds. Ares clenched her fists, the bruises on her arms still fresh, a constant reminder of her own defeat. She had lost to K7, but what stung more was the fact that she hadn't understood why she lost. No opponent had ever made her feel so powerless. She wasn't used to being outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and worst of all, ignored. K7 had never even bothered to look at her after the match. It was as though she had meant nothing to him. And that, above all, was the deepest wound. "What are you, K7?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the empty room. What kind of fighter doesn't care about winning? The Vraxen Council, led by her father, had summoned her for an urgent meeting. They had watched the footage from K7's fight and the analysis that followed. The discussion was tense, filled with nervous energy as the higher-ups tried to decide what to do with this anomaly. "He's too dangerous," one of the generals argued, slamming his fist on the table. "We cannot allow him to remain in the arena. He's disrupting everything. He's not just breaking the rules, he's rewriting them." Ares stood at the edge of the room, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the council members. Her pride was still wounded, but beneath the surface there was something else, an insatiable curiosity. She needed to know how K7 had done it, how he had made them fear him. "Perhaps he is the perfect weapon," another council member suggested, her voice soft but full of conviction. "He's unpredictable, efficient, and silent. He doesn't seek glory or recognition. All he needs is a fight." The room fell silent as everyone turned to Ares. She felt the weight of their gaze but didn't flinch. She was no longer just a daughter of the throne, she was a warrior, and her defeat at K7's hands had opened something within her. She could no longer think of him as just an opponent to be crushed. He was more than that now. He was a test. "I want him," Ares said, her voice firm and determined. "I will face him again." The council exchanged looks. There was hesitation, a sense of caution. They knew her reputation, knew the pride she carried like a weapon in itself, but they also knew that K7 had shattered the unshakable. What if she wasn't enough? What if K7 wasn't a fighter they could control? "I want him in the arena again," Ares repeated. "No weapons, no tricks, just me and him." The council leader, her father, finally spoke. "You are not to take this lightly, Ares. K7 is not just a slave anymore. He's a symbol. If you fail..." Ares raised her hand to silence him. She knew the risks, but she also knew that failure wasn't an option. She had to prove to herself and to the galaxy that she was still the greatest warrior. And for that, she would need to understand K7, not just defeat him. The stage was set again. This time, it would be different. The next week, the announcement came. The galaxy watched in anticipation as the arena gates were opened once more. Ares would face K7 in a one-on-one battle. No distractions, no interference. Just the two of them. A test of will, of strength, and of silence. But as the crowd roared and the spotlight illuminated the center of the arena, Ares couldn't help but feel a strange sense of dread settle in her chest. This fight was more than just a battle for victory. It was a battle for herself. She entered the arena first, her silver armor shining in the light, her steps confident, but her heart pounding beneath the metal. This time, she would not underestimate him. She would not be fooled by his silence. She would break him. But as the opposite gate creaked open, her breath caught in her throat. K7 walked into the arena as he had before. Silent, unassuming, yet somehow far more terrifying. His chains rattled softly as he stepped forward, his bare feet making no sound on the sand. His eyes were locked on the ground, his posture unyielding. Ares clenched her fists. "This time, I'll make him speak." But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew the truth. K7 didn't need to speak. He never had. He wasn't here to taunt, to gloat, or to make her afraid. He was here to prove something far more dangerous, that he didn't need to fight at all to win. And with that, the bell rang. The fight had begun. Ares charged, her whip crackling to life in her hand, but K7 did not move. He stood there, calm, poised, waiting. She struck, her movements faster than lightning, but K7 effortlessly sidestepped every blow. He wasn't fighting, he was observing. He was studying her every move, every weakness. Her frustration began to rise. She attacked with more fury, more speed, but with each failed strike she realized something horrifying. He wasn't reacting because he didn't need to. He was always one step ahead, one move in the future. And that realization that she was the one being studied hit harder than any blow. She wasn't in control of the fight. She was a piece in his game. Then, without warning, K7 moved. His foot swept under hers, knocking her off balance. Before she could recover, his hand was on her wrist, twisting with a force she hadn't anticipated. There was a crack, a loud, sickening crack, and suddenly Ares found herself on the ground, her arm useless at her side. The crowd went silent. Ares struggled to breathe, her pride crumbling with each labored inhale. But K7 did not press the advantage. He didn't strike the finishing blow. He simply stood above her, his eyes unreadable, and once again, he turned his back and walked away. It was over. This time, there were no cheers. There were no roars of triumph. There was only the sound of Ares' heart pounding in her chest, the weight of her defeat heavier than any armor. She had failed. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy began to understand what K7 had always known. He didn't need to prove anything. He had already won. As Ares lay on the ground, staring up at the empty sky, she realized that the true victory wasn't in defeating an opponent. It was in walking away from the fight altogether, and that, more than anything, terrified her. The arena was still. The silence was deafening. Ares, the once proud and undefeated champion, lay on the ground, her breath shallow, her arm useless at her side. K7 had walked away from her again, just as he had done in their first encounter. The crowd's roar had died with the realization that they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something no one fully understood. Ares lay there, unable to move, her thoughts racing. Every muscle in her body screamed in pain, but the true agony came from somewhere deeper. She had been defeated, not by the sheer strength of her opponent, but by something more terrifying, his control. Her mind kept replaying the moments leading up to her defeat. The way K7 had anticipated every move, the way he had moved with such precision and grace that it was almost as though he knew what she was going to do before she did. She had faced many enemies in her life, but none had ever made her feel so out of control. As the medics rushed to her side, Ares couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was no triumphant victory dance, no smug expression on K7's face. There was only silence, and that silence had shaken her more than any blow could have. A few hours later, Ares sat in her private chamber, her arms still immobilized, the sharp sting of defeat fresh in her mind. She had watched the footage of the fight over and over again. Each time, it felt more surreal, more impossible. The way K7 had moved, like a shadow that never fully revealed itself. There was something unnatural about him. As her thoughts spiraled, she heard a knock on the door. Her father, the leader of the Vraxan Empire, entered without waiting for her permission. His eyes, usually full of pride, were now clouded with concern. "You've been watching it again, haven't you?" he said softly, his voice betraying a rare hint of unease. Ares didn't answer. She simply nodded, still unable to fully process what had happened. She wasn't sure if she was more frustrated with herself or with the enigma that was K7. "I warned you," her father continued. "We cannot let him remain in the arena. He destabilizes everything. He defies the very nature of combat. He doesn't fight to win. He fights to remove the need for victory." Ares turned her gaze toward her father, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "What do you mean? He did win. He humiliated me in front of everyone." Her father paused before speaking again, his tone now grave. "No, Ares, he didn't win. He didn't even care about winning. That's the problem. He's not just another warrior. He's something else, something more dangerous." Ares sat up straighter, her curiosity piqued. "What are you saying? You've seen what I've seen. No one moves like that. No one fights like that." "He's a weapon," her father interrupted, his voice harsh. "We don't know where he came from. We don't know who or what he really is. But we do know this. He's not just a fighter. He's a symbol, one that can't be controlled. And if he's left unchecked, he could break the very fabric of our empire. Ares clenched her fists, anger bubbling to the surface. You want me to kill him? Is that it? Just finish him? Her father's eyes hardened. No, Ares, we need to understand him first. If he truly is a weapon, an uncontrollable one, then we need to figure out where he comes from, who he comes from. Ares didn't respond. She couldn't. Her pride, her desire for vengeance, clouded her judgment. But deep down, a cold, creeping fear had begun to form. Her father was right. There was something wrong about K7. He was more than just a man. He was a threat. And for the first time in her life, Ares felt like she was no longer the hunter, but the hunted. Days passed in a blur of preparations. Ares' next match was already scheduled, but it wasn't against K7. He had disappeared once again, slipping through the cracks of the Empire's grasp. But his presence lingered in every corner of the galaxy, in every conversation, every whisper. Meanwhile, Ares had become obsessed. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the fight, about the silence that had haunted her in the moments before her defeat. She had studied every piece of footage, every analysis, and every theory that experts had come up with. Some claimed K7 was simply a product of years of combat training. Others believed he was part of some secret military project. But there was one theory that kept coming back to her, one theory that made her skin crawl. Some believed K7 was a machine, or at least something that acted like one. His precise movements, his coldness, the lack of any emotional reaction, it all pointed to something beyond human. But if that was true, then what was K7? A weapon? A bioengineered assassin? Or something far worse? As Ares lay awake that night, her thoughts consumed by these questions, she finally made a decision. She would find him. She had to, not just to defeat him, but to understand him, to break him, if necessary. She needed to know who or what K7 truly was before the galaxy found out. Because if he was truly what they feared, then it would only be a matter of time before K7 became the one thing the Empire couldn't control. Ares stood up, her eyes hard with resolve. Tomorrow, she would track him down. No more distractions, no more waiting. K7 had become her obsession, and she would make him face the consequences of his silence. She wouldn't let him walk away this time. Not without an answer. The Vraxan Empire was vast, its influence spanning across countless systems, each ruled with the iron fist of tradition and power. But beneath the veneer of control, there were cracks, subtle and often ignored. The defeat of Ares by K7 was one of those cracks, small enough at first to be dismissed, but deep enough to unsettle the Empire. Ares knew that, while the galaxy watched with rapt attention, the true battle was being fought in the shadows. She would not allow herself to become another footnote in the legend of K7. Ares spent days tracking down every lead, using her vast resources to piece together any scrap of information she could find about K7. The Empire's intelligence networks, usually swift and precise, had found nothing. It was as if he had no past, no records, no origins, just the cryptic designation, K7, and a history of unexplainable feats of combat. Each system that had witnessed his victories, from the battle arenas to the military strongholds, only had fragmented accounts, none of which explained the quiet power that emanated from him. Her obsession deepened with every passing hour. She had fought many warriors, some stronger than others, but none had left her so unbalanced. There was something about K7 that gnawed at her, something in the way he moved, the way he waited. His silence wasn't just an absence of words, it was an absence of fear, an absence of desire. It was almost as if he had transcended the need to win. For the first time in her life, Ares was the one who was unsure, and that terrified her. Late one night, as the moonlight cast long shadows across her chamber, Ares received an encrypted transmission from an anonymous source. The message was short, its contents fragmented, but its meaning was clear. K7 was not just a fighter. He had been part of something much larger, something hidden. The message contained coordinates to a remote facility on the forgotten moon of Talon Vive, far outside the reach of the Empire. The facility was old, its purpose unclear, but the source claimed that K7 had been there. The transmission ended abruptly, the data scrubbed clean before any trace could be left behind. Ares sat back in her chair, her fingers running over the edge of the datapad. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting for a clue, a sign, and now it was here. Talon V. It was as if the galaxy itself was pushing her toward the truth. Without hesitation, she activated her comms and sent a private transmission to her most trusted ally, Thorn, the head of the Empire's covert operations. Thorn was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his actions spoke louder. He had been the one to organize her training, the one who had prepared her for the toughest battles. But this was different. This wasn't just a fight for victory, it was a fight for understanding. Talon Vive, Ares instructed, her voice cold and determined. Prepare a ship. I'm going alone. Thorn hesitated on the other end of the comms. Ares, this is a bad idea. We don't know what's waiting for you on Talon Vive. It could be a trap. We need backup. I'm going alone, she repeated, her voice unwavering. I need to face this on my own. I need to know who he really is. There was silence on the other end, but she could sense Thorn's understanding. He knew that there was no changing her mind once she had set her course. The ship was ready within the hour. Ares boarded, her heart pounding with anticipation. Talon Vive was a forsaken world, hidden from the Empire's prying eyes, a place where secrets had been buried long ago. As the ship broke through the atmosphere and descended toward the surface, the vast expanse of the barren moon stretched before her, a desolate wasteland of cracked soil and jagged rocks. She landed at the coordinates provided in the message. The facility, half buried in the sand, was more than she expected. It was ancient. The walls of the complex made of materials that predated even the Empire's founding. The architecture was alien, but strangely familiar, as if it had been abandoned long ago by a race that had understood power in a way that even Ares could not comprehend. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. The walls were lined with strange symbols, carvings that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. It felt as though the very structure of the building was alive, breathing in time with her footsteps. Her pulse quickened as she moved deeper into the facility, the eerie quiet pressing in on her from all sides. Ares knew she was getting close. The walls seemed to narrow, the passages growing tighter, until she reached a large chamber at the heart of the facility. It was here that she found him, K7. He was standing in the center of the room, facing a tall, translucent screen that flickered with static. His back was to her, but she knew it was him. There was no mistaking the silhouette of the man who had shattered her confidence. Ares didn't speak at first. She wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't a confrontation. This wasn't a challenge. It was something more intimate, more profound. She had come to understand him, to learn what made him tick, and now she was standing in the presence of the one person who had made her question everything. K7 didn't turn around. He knew she was there. He had known from the moment she entered the room. "You've come for answers," he said quietly, his voice low and controlled, carrying an authority that sent a shiver down her spine. "But you already know the truth." Ares' breath caught in her throat. How could he know? How could he possibly know what she was thinking? She stepped forward, the sound of her boots echoing in the empty chamber. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady but tinged with desperation. "What are you?" K7 finally turned to face her. His eyes were cold, but there was no malice in them, just clarity. It was a gaze that pierced through her, as though he could see everything she was, everything she had been, and everything she feared to become. "I am what you've become," he said. "I am the silence in the storm, the void in the battle. You came here for answers, but you already know the truth. You already know what I am." Ares' mind raced. She had expected to find something, anything, that would explain the enigma before her, but instead she felt empty. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want to hear that the one thing she feared most, silence, restraint, control, was exactly what she had been trained to fight against. "I was made," K7 continued, his voice growing more distant. "I was broken into this, but when they gave me a voice, I realized that I didn't need it. Silence is power, and you, Ares, you've spent your whole life seeking victory. But the true victory is not in winning, it is in choosing not to fight." Ares stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. For the first time, she felt like she had reached the end of something. Not the end of her journey, but the end of her understanding of herself, of what it meant to fight to live. And in that moment, Ares realized that the fight was never really against K7. It had always been within herself. And the room was still, save for the faint hum of the distant machinery. The air was thick with tension, and despite the strange tranquility of the chamber, Ares could feel the world outside pressing in on her. She had come to Talon V seeking answers, seeking the truth about K7, and now she found herself standing at the edge of that truth, a precipice she wasn't sure she was ready to face. K7 stood before her, his presence as unyielding and serene as ever. He had spoken the words that cut deeper than any weapon ever could. Silence is power. It wasn't just a phrase. It was a philosophy, one that defied everything Ares had been taught. Her entire life had been centered around domination, physical prowess, strategic cunning, and the desire to prove her superiority in every fight. And yet here stood K7, someone who didn't need to prove anything, someone who didn't even need to fight to win. Ares took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Her fingers twitched, aching to reach for her whip, to lash out, to challenge him, but the silence in the room seemed to hold her back. She couldn't move. Not yet. You're wrong, she finally spoke, her voice strained. Victory is everything. Without victory, there is nothing. The arena, the battles, the fights, they define us. They prove we are worthy. K7's eyes, so cold and calculating, softened ever so slightly. His gaze never left hers as he slowly walked toward her. He didn't raise a hand, didn't take a threatening step, but the very act of his movement commanded attention. That's what they told you, he said softly. That's what they've always told you. But that's not the truth. Victory, honor, power, they're fleeting. The real strength is in choosing not to be defined by them. Ares stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. This was madness. Everything she had lived for, everything she had fought for, was built on the premise that strength came from winning, from beating her opponents into submission. But here he was, standing in front of her, telling her that not fighting was the truest form of power. Then, what is it you want from me? Ares asked, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to keep it steady. Why am I here? K7 didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer until they were only a few paces apart, and for the first time, Ares felt a sense of vulnerability that she had never experienced in the arena. The space between them was charged, thick with the weight of their unspoken words. She wasn't sure if she was looking at an enemy or a mirror, but the discomfort of the moment was undeniable. I want you to see, K7 said, his voice low and steady. I want you to see beyond the fight, to see what lies underneath the armor, the titles, the power. I want you to see who you are without them. Ares' mind was spinning. She had built herself up to be the perfect warrior, the perfect fighter. She had molded herself in the image of strength and dominance, and for the first time she wondered what was left of her once all of that was stripped away. Who would she be if she didn't need to fight, if she didn't need to win? K7's words were a slow burn, a challenge to everything she had believed. She had never thought of herself as anything more than a fighter, a champion, someone who thrived in battle. But K7's silence, his deliberate restraint, had made her question it all. She was no longer sure who she was. Was she Ares, the undefeated? Or was she just a woman desperately trying to hold on to something that didn't even exist anymore? You don't have to fight anymore, K7 continued, his voice cutting through her thoughts. You've already proven everything, but you've been living in the shadow of a lie that says your worth is measured by how many people you've defeated. The truth is, your worth was never about the fights you won. It's about who you are when the fight is over. Ares' breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this kind of truth. She had come here expecting to find a secret, to uncover the source of K7's power, but what she found was a reflection of her own insecurity. She had always believed in the glory of the fight, in the idea that the strongest prevailed, but now she wondered if that had been her weakness all along. You think you can change me? Ares whispered, her voice a mixture of defiance and disbelief. You think you can make me walk away from everything I've ever known? K7's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Perhaps understanding. Perhaps pity. But it wasn't the pity of a conqueror. It was the pity of someone who had seen the truth and knew that even the strongest warriors could be lost in their own illusions. I don't want to change you, K7 said gently. I want you to see that you don't need to change. You are already more than the person the arena made you. You've always been more. You just have to believe it. Ares felt a tremor of doubt slip into her heart. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to believe. The walls she had so carefully built around herself, the walls that had made her a legend, were crumbling. She had built herself up as an unshakable force, but now, standing before K7, she realized that those walls had always been made of sand, fragile and fleeting. The silence between them stretched long and heavy, a silence that held no malice, no judgment, just understanding. For the first time, Ares felt something that she had never allowed herself to feel before: vulnerability. K7 turned to walk toward the exit, and Ares felt a pang of something deep within her. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was more than just the frustration of defeat. It was the slow realization that she didn't need to be the person she had once been. She didn't need to fight just to prove her worth. You may be the strongest fighter in the arena, Ares, K7 said over his shoulder as he reached the door. But the real strength is in what you choose to fight for. And right now, you don't need to fight me. You need to fight yourself. Ares stood there in the silence of the chamber, alone once more. But this time, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt freeing. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but for the first time in her life, she understood that true strength didn't come from winning. It came from the choice not to fight, from the wisdom to walk away when the fight was no longer worth fighting. And as she left Talonfont Vive, Ares realized that she had just begun the greatest battle of all, the battle to understand who she was, without the need for titles, without the need to prove anything. She was about to learn what it truly meant to be free. The stars outside her ship's viewport were a blur, streaking by like scattered diamonds against the velvet dark of space. Ares sat in the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls, but her mind was far from the distant reaches of the galaxy. It had been days since her meeting with K7, days since the truth about herself had begun to settle like dust in the corners of her mind. The path ahead was uncertain. She had left Talon 5 with a question that gnawed at her, the same question that had brought her here in the first place. Who am I without the fight? The galaxy expected greatness from her, the champions who had won and bled for victory, the symbols of strength that could never show weakness. And yet, K7 had made her realize something she could no longer ignore. Strength wasn't just in victory. It was in the ability to choose, to walk away when every part of her wanted to fight. She had thought victory was everything, but now she wasn't so sure. Her ship's communications flickered, snapping her back to the present. A voice crackled through the speakers, urgent and clipped. Ares, we need you back. The council has requested your immediate presence. Her father's voice, always so commanding, so sure. It was a call she had been expecting, a summons she couldn't ignore. He wouldn't be pleased. He didn't understand. No one understands. The ship made its descent, cutting through the thick atmosphere of Vraxen Prime, the home world of her people. The sprawling metropolis below shimmered with lights, a gleaming testament to the Empire's dominance. But to Ares, it felt like a prison. She had been born into power, raised with expectations too heavy to bear, and now the weight of her past choices was suffocating. The council chamber was massive, its walls adorned with holographic projections of the galaxy, planets, ships, empires, all under Vraxen rule. Her father, as always, stood at the head of the room, flanked by his advisors, military generals, and dignitaries. His presence loomed large, an unshakable force that had built the empire from the ground up. And yet, in this moment, Ares felt a growing chasm between them. She entered the room, her armor polished, her posture rigid. The moment she stepped inside, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, some with curiosity, some with expectation, and others with judgment. She could feel their eyes on her, analyzing her every move, every breath. Ares, her father greeted her, his voice sharp but measured. You've returned. I've returned, she replied, her voice steady but lacking the usual fire. She took her place at the table, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she saw something new in his gaze, something that wasn't just pride. It was frustration, disappointment. You failed, he said, his voice colder than usual. The words hit her like a blow, but she didn't flinch. Not anymore. She had heard worse in the arenas. But this was different. This was her father, the man who had raised her to be a weapon, a force of nature. To fail in his eyes was a weight she couldn't escape. "I didn't fail," Ares said quietly. "I just realized the fight isn't everything." The room shifted uncomfortably at her words. Whispers followed, but Ares didn't care. She had said what she needed to say. She had come to terms with it in her own heart. She didn't need to be the perfect warrior, the perfect symbol of strength. Her father's eyes narrowed, his frustration palpable. "You lost to K7. You allowed him to walk away from you without even fighting for your honor. What kind of warrior does that?" The question hung in the air, thick with tension. Ares knew the answer, but it wasn't an answer she was prepared to give. Not here. Not now. "I don't need to fight anymore," she said, her voice low but filled with an unshakable certainty. "K7 showed me that victory isn't in beating someone, it's in knowing when not to fight." Her father looked at her, his face a mask of cold calculation. The silence that followed was deafening. The advisors exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of her words. To them, Ares had always been the perfect weapon, the flawless fighter who never backed down. Now, she was something else entirely. A person who was willing to question everything she had been taught. "You've changed," her father said quietly, more to himself than to her. His gaze softened for a moment, but only for a fleeting second. "But the Empire doesn't have the luxury of change. We fight because we must. We fight because if we don't, others will take what's ours." "I know," Ares replied, her voice steady, "but I'm no longer willing to fight just because it's expected of me. I've been fighting for the wrong reasons." There was a long pause before her father spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "And what are you going to do, Ares? Walk away from your legacy, from everything we've built?" The words stung, but Ares didn't flinch. "I'm going to build something new. Something that doesn't require constant battle. Something that doesn't rely on the blood of others to survive." Her father's eyes burned with anger now, his patience slipping away. "Do you understand what you're saying? You're willing to walk away from the Empire? From everything I've taught you?" "I'm not walking away," Ares said firmly. "I'm redefining what it means to be a leader, to be strong. I don't need the arena to prove who I am. I've already proven it to myself." The room was dead silent as Ares's words hung in the air. She could feel the weight of the council's disapproval pressing down on her, but she didn't care. For the first time, she had chosen her path, and that path didn't lead back to the arena. Her father stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded, though the gesture felt heavy, reluctant. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "But understand this, Ares. Our enemies will not stop because you've chosen peace. They will not stop until we are no longer in control. And if you are unwilling to fight for the Empire, then it will be someone else who leads." Ares held her father's gaze, her resolve solidifying with each passing second. "Then let it be. I will fight when the fight is right. I will lead when the cause is just. But I will not be a puppet to a system that values power over purpose." Her father said nothing more. The council remained silent. Ares stood up, her heart steady, her mind clear. She had made her choice, and the road ahead, though uncertain, was hers to walk. As she left the council chamber, the weight of her decision settled around her like a cloak. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing: she would never fight for the wrong reasons again. And in that certainty, she found a new kind of strength, one that no arena could ever measure. The Vraxan skyline stretched before her, a sprawling city of gleaming towers and infinite pathways. To the outside world, it was a symbol of unshakable power. But to Ares, standing on the balcony of her private quarters, it looked like a gilded cage. She had spent her entire life fighting for the Empire, but now, standing on the precipice of a new world, she realized that the Empire had always been a prison, one made of expectations, not bars. The morning light filtered through the massive windows of her chambers, casting long shadows on the floor. She felt the warmth of the sun on her face, but also the chill of uncertainty in her heart. The council had accepted her decision, for now, but there was no mistaking the tension in the air. Her father had not forgiven her, not truly, but she knew what he didn't. There was no turning back. Ares had taken the first step, but the journey ahead was daunting. She had rejected the arena. She had rejected the fight for dominance. Now, she had to forge a new path, one that would define not just her future, but the future of those who had once followed her blindly. She no longer wanted to be a leader in the traditional sense, someone who ruled by fear, by victory, by the destruction of others. No, she wanted to build something else, something far greater. As she turned away from the view, the door to her quarters slid open and a familiar face appeared. Thorn, her most trusted ally, the one person who had always stood by her even when the Empire had cheered for her destruction. He entered, his face unreadable, his footsteps quiet on the polished floor. "Ares," he said softly, his voice the same steady tone he had used when they had fought side by side in the arena. "You've made your choice, but you know it won't be easy." Ares nodded, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength. "I know, Thorn, but it's the only choice I have left. I can't keep pretending that this is the only way, that this..." She gestured to the city outside. The empire that had once been her whole world is the answer. Thorn stepped closer, his gaze softening. He had been with her through it all. He had seen her at her strongest and her weakest. He had watched as she became the weapon the Empire had shaped her to be. And now, he was watching her walk away from it all. "You're not the same woman I knew," Thorn said, his voice full of quiet admiration. "You've changed. You found something else, something beyond what we've been taught, and I'm with you, whatever you decide." Ares felt a knot tighten in her chest. Thorn's loyalty had always been unwavering, but now she wondered if he understood the full scope of what she was choosing. She wasn't just rejecting the Empire. She wasn't just walking away from the life she had known. She was rejecting the idea that victory and power were the ultimate measures of worth. She was rejecting the very foundation that had once defined her existence. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I know that I have to create something different, something that doesn't rely on control or domination. I have to find a way to lead by something other than fear." Thorn's eyes searched hers for a moment before he spoke again. "I believe in you, Ares, but you're right, this won't be easy. The galaxy is full of enemies, and many of them won't understand your choice. They will see you as weak, as betraying the Empire. There are others who will see this as an opportunity to take what's ours. The Vraxan Empire won't sit idle while you create a new path. They'll come for you. They'll come for us." Ares nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Let them come. They can try to take control, but I'm not going to fight for the wrong reasons anymore. I'll fight for something else, for a future that isn't bound by violence and dominance." For the first time in weeks, Ares felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, and there was no guarantee that her path would lead to peace or prosperity. But she had made her choice. She would no longer be a pawn in the Empire's game. She would carve her own destiny, regardless of the consequences. Thorn looked at her, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Then we'll need allies, and we'll need to be ready." Ares turned to him, her eyes fierce. "I know. I've already begun. There are those who believe in what we can build, and I won't let the Empire stop us. This time, we fight for what's right." The next few weeks were a blur of preparations. Ares met with former allies, those who had once fought alongside her in the arenas, and those who had been disillusioned by the Empire's methods. She found unexpected support among those who had seen the emptiness of the system they had served. Together, they began to form a movement, a coalition of fighters, diplomats, and thinkers who shared her vision of a new world. But the Empire was not blind to her actions. Every step Ares took toward creating a new path was met with resistance. The Vraxan Empire had always operated in secrecy and power, and they would not relinquish control without a fight. Spies were sent to infiltrate her group, agents dispatched to stop her before she could build the momentum she needed. But Ares was ready. She had learned from K7's silence. Sometimes the best way to strike was when your enemy least expected it. She didn't need to fight every battle with weapons. She would fight with her mind, with her resolve, and with her vision for something greater. The first major confrontation came when a fleet of Vraxan ships was sent to her location, an isolated planet where her coalition had begun to form its headquarters. The battle was fierce, but Ares and her allies fought with a purpose that the Empire could never understand. They weren't fighting for glory. They weren't fighting for power, they were fighting for the future. The fleet was pushed back, but Ares knew that this was just the beginning. The Empire would retaliate, of course. They would not let her escape without a fight. But for the first time in her life, Ares didn't feel afraid. She felt alive. This fight was different. It wasn't about winning, it was about living. As the battle ended and the smoke began to clear, Ares stood on the surface of the planet, her heart pounding, her breath steady. She had chosen her path, and she would walk it no matter the cost. In the distance, she saw the faint silhouette of K7 standing just outside the camp, watching. He had always been a shadow, an enigma, but now Ares knew that she had walked beyond the shadow. She had stepped into the light, and it was here, in the silence that followed the fight, that Ares understood the most important truth of all. True strength was never about power or victory. It was about the courage to choose a different way. It was about the courage to change. And for the first time, Ares felt like she was finally free. Thank you for watching this incredible journey unfold. If K7's story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take on what true strength really means. Your support helps us keep bringing you more epic stories, so join the community and stay with us for the next adventure. Until next time, remember, sometimes the silence speaks louder than any battle cry.